Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are around the world. We're about to start. Sorry, apologies for the slightly late start. We wanted to ensure that our members were on board, and you know that there could be challenges around the world with connectivity. First of all, I would like to welcome everyone to this meeting, to the continuation of the 12th meeting of the Executive Committee of the Warsaw International Mechanism for Loss and Damage. And thank you for our observers for being here with us. Just before we launch into the meeting, just a few points, just to alert observers that we will be soon be putting up the key points from day one. So that, as you requested, so that you could have an idea for those who are not with us, what was discussed and agreed upon in essence, and also for those who were there, just as a reminder. So that will be coming soon. A reminder also that, of course, we have 2 hours. Well, now we have 1 hour, 45 minutes, which is a very limited time for our live discussions. As such, we do encourage the submission of the inputs from our observers as much as possible, and you would have been provided with the email address to facilitate those inputs. Incidentally, just as a reminder, based on a request from the observers, the inputs are specific to matters that have been discussed during the Xcom meeting. So matters that were discussed on Monday, and of course what you will hear today and during the week as well. Indicating also that you should be monitoring the website, as we will be continuing to post documents as we go along. So do keep checking our website. And also for the purposes of the meeting and to help us with the bandwidth, to please turn off your video if you are not speaking, and please turn off your mic as well if you are not speaking. When you are taking the floor, whether you are observer or Xcom member, then of course you turn on your mic and your video. Having done this little bit of housekeeping, just what is the plan for today? Please note that in terms of the plan, we have the indicative schedule of work, which is available on the website. So you do have that. And we want to take up in the next 1 hour and 45 minutes. Item 5 on the role and contribution of the Xcom in the global stocktake. We also want to deal with item 6 on the report of the Xcom, and item 7A on the summary of the 2020 self-evaluation, as well as item 7E on loss and damage contact points. All of these items are indicated in the indicative agenda, so you could have a look at this. So let's turn our attention now to agenda item 5 on the role and contribution of the Xcom to the global stocktake as contained in decision 19/CMA.1. So I'm assuming that everyone is familiar with this. This co-chair's note for this item is available on the Xcom 12 webpage. And as you would note, the note compiles relevant paragraphs from decision 19/CMA.1. And this contains related information on the global stocktake, of course, and 2 points around which to structure our deliberations and discussion in the next few minutes. Before we actually put up the slide, I just want to take you very briefly through the points, just to say that the points would be referring in the note that you all have. You will note that it points out paras 1, 3, 4, 5, 6B, double I, as well as paras 24, 35, 36E, 47D. I won't assume to run through the paras, time will not allow this, but you do have it in front of you. And you will note, I will just reference very quickly para 4, that speaks to the assistance of the subsidiary bodies for implementation, and that for and SBSTA as well, to establish that joint contact group on this matter. And you know that our Xcom channels also are SBI and SBSTA. You also see para 5 refers to engaging in a technical dialogue, supporting the work of the joint contact group. You note that para 6B speaks to the technical dialogue, specifically that the global stocktake may take into account as appropriate efforts related to its work on, and that is item II on averting, minimizing, and addressing loss and damage associated with the adverse effects of climate change. A quick reference to para 24 that speaks to the relevant constituted bodies and the preparation for the technical assessment with the assistance of the Secretariat, that is synthesis reports on the information that is to be compiled. Para 35 very briefly speaks to the sources. Para 36E also speaks to the sources of inputs and the consideration of information on a collective level, and it speaks specifically to efforts to understanding, action, and support on a cooperative and facilitative basis relating to averting, minimizing, and addressing loss and damage associated with the adverse effects of climate change. And of course, para 37D speaks to the sources in terms of the reports from relevant constituted bodies and forums and other institutional arrangements, and of course, the Xcom being one of those constituted bodies. I took the time to do this, even if you have the note, to ensure that we are all on the same page, information-wise. And of course, looking at the role of the Xcom, what information should we prepare for the synthesis report? And the possible scope of the information in response to para 36E, which I just referenced, and how such information would be communicated, the indicative time frame, and the milestones for this. Also, the note indicates how to liaise with other constituted bodies to promote this collaboration and synergy. That is, of course, to be able to ensure complementarity, to avoid issues of duplication with other constituted bodies. So I'm really hoping that this has taken you through. May I ask the Secretariat, unless you've done it and I'm not seeing, to put it up on the slide, put the slide up, please. Thank you. So basically, as you will see, parties by decision 19/CMA1, as I said, paragraph 24, invited the relevant constituted bodies and forums and other institutional arrangements under or serving the Paris Agreement and or the synthesis reports on information identified in paragraph 36 in their areas of expertise. So that is what I would have just pointed out in the note, which you have, and further pointed out on the slide before you. And again, taking note of the timeline of the global stocktake, I think we're all aware of that 2023 timeline, as contained in that decision. Xcom 9, which was in April of 2019, agreed to consider the role and contribution of the Xcom in future meetings, starting with the first meeting of 2020. But I think we all know what happened at the beginning of 2020. So at that first meeting of 2020, which was Xcom 11 in March 2020, the Xcom was unable to consider the item due to time constraints. Again, we had begun our first virtual session, which was a new way of working for us. And with a short session, we were not able to conclude on all of the items we had intended to do in a short live session. So the co-chair's notes for this item were prepared to be able to structure the discussion here at Xcom 12. So as the plan for the slot is to be able to have an exchange of initial views on the Xcom's role and contribution in the context of paragraph 24 of the decision, that is decision 19/CMA.1. That is in terms of, as I said before, what information the Xcom would prepare as input to the global stocktake and agree on the next steps to be taken intercessionally. That is, what is within our capacity, what is within our reach to do as an Xcom, what is practical, but importantly, what is useful. And also that, of course, we recognize, as I said, it is initial views that we will be exchanging because the work needs to continue intersessionally. So begin to think of yourself as a potential champion Xcom members, because we will be calling for that by the end of the session. Could you put on the next slide, please? So much of that I've indicated. In terms of what the discussion will be today, and we would really like to open the floor to members to be able to share the views, to share your views. And the views to be shared at this point will be on the possible scope of the information in reference to para 36E, how such information would be communicated, indicative timeframes, and milestones. So this is the first part of what we will be talking about before we move on to the second part in terms of the liaising with constituted bodies. We hope to be able to work efficiently so that we can open the floor to observers at a later point and still set up our champions group to take the work forward. Having said all of this, without further ado, I would like to open the floor to members to discuss this first item on the possible scope of information, how such information would be communicated, an indicative time frame and milestones. I'm hoping that this is clear. The floor is open to Xcom members. Okay, should I be looking at the chat? I'm not seeing the hands. Miwa, am I missing anything?
So we have Nidal followed by Lian raised their hands.
Okay, I think there was a slight delay on my end. Nidal.
Thank you so much, Madam Co-Chair. And if you allow me only just an initial reflection on the Co-Chair's note in that regard on the roles of the Xcom. In principle, I think it is very much of what we are talking about is related and will be under the mandate of the ASEG group in principle, the expert group on action and support. If we're talking about the resources or inputs where we can find such kind of inputs for this information, I think in principle it should come from all sources of information. And especially if we are talking about the reporting commitments from the parties, which is in principle the national communications, the NDCs, the BURs, TURs, the NAPs, all these kind of resources, and the time frame for this is depend on the delivery time of these kind of reports that will be submitted to the Secretariat. So I think these are the areas where we are looking for such kind of information. And in that regard, I think it is important to have some kind of efficient coordination, for example, with other constituency bodies, including the LEG, for example, which are guiding the parties on the reporting format, for example, under the national communication or the national adaptation plans. And on the way how we may collect such kind of information, if it is submitted through these kind of way, I think one of the areas which we used earlier, some kind of synthesis reports and surveys that bring whatever information in the national reports to be reflected in such kind of synthesis report. This is a brief and initial thoughts. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Nidal, for sharing your thoughts on this in terms of multiple sources of input, in terms of at least one of the expert groups that you see working on this issue, and so on. We are capturing the inputs, noting that this is just an initial discussion, which we hope to continue into session early. I see Leanne.
Hello, everyone, and thanks to the co-chairs and the secretariat for putting together a comprehensive outline to guide our deliberations on this topic. Brief reflections in terms of the scope of information. The Xcom has a 5-year rolling work plan which outlines the areas that are being addressed in its work. Slow onset events, non-economic losses, comprehensive risk management, the task force on displacement, and action and support. And I think in terms of what we would then provide in any synthesis reports or other reports for the global stocktake, it should have information around all those focus areas. The fact that the global stocktake is also monitoring progress on the Paris Agreement, I looked back at Article 8 and saw that there were some areas such as early warning systems, emergency preparedness, etc. And those are in one way or another captured in the thematic areas of the 5-year rolling work plan. So in terms of the scope of information, I think those two provide some very valuable input in that regard. Nidal before me spoke about the expert group on action and support. And I think if we take the approach of looking at all the thematic areas, then the other expert groups, may have a role, but that's really for us to discuss a little bit more fulsomely, even as we have our intersessional meetings, and to see how in the plans of actions and other deliberations to be held there, the information that may emanate from those meetings can have a role to play in what we put forward. But again, that's discussion that we can have a little bit later. But for now, those are some initial reflections with respect to the first point. Thank you.
Thank you, Leanne, for that. Noting your reference to Article 8 in terms of information, also noting your support of Nidal's point on having multiple sources, etc. We are taking notes, so I will not attempt to summarize the points as you each speak, otherwise it will be taking too much time. I think the next one, thanks for that, Leanne. The next person is Farhan.
Thank you, everyone, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, all. Thanks for convening this discussion on the global stocktake and our input into it. Just very briefly, and in my initial sort of take, I think our perspective should be focused primarily upon the work that we have done through our work plan and capturing the information that's within that work plan across the different work streams through the expert groups and the work that they've done, that the Xcom can pull together a synthesis of that information and provide it towards the parties as they undertake their technical dialogues on as part of the global stocktake process. I wouldn't go so far as to say that we would need to start, overstepping into the actual technical dialogue phase of the global stocktake, and I think it'd be better for us to, turn ourselves to, what our expertise is, which is, the work that's in our work plan, and to make sure that we are able to capture the outputs of that work on a regular basis, and provide that to the global stocktake process. So that's just a very brief and initial sort of view of where I see the work of the Xcom on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you for that contribution, Farhan. A note of caution raised here by Farhan in terms of mandates, but also in terms of what is perhaps doable, practical, what may already be happening, and creating those synergies with the various groups, etc. So again, as I indicated, we are just taking note of all of the inputs that are being raised by members with the intention to continue the discussions intersessionally. I am, again, having a look to see if there are additional hands up. May you all tell me if I'm missing anyone. Otherwise, I'm just going to give members a few more minutes, either to react to comments made by the three speakers to date, or to be able to make an additional intervention. Okay, so at this point, it looks like for now we've gotten those initial views from our members. Let us move on to the second item, which is looking a little closer now at how to liaise with other constituted bodies, if deemed necessary, on what reports the other bodies are planning to produce in response to the mandate, to produce the that kind of collaboration and to produce the kind of synergy that we're looking for. Because clearly we want to ensure that there is complementarity. We want to ensure that we avoid duplication as much as possible with the other constituted bodies. Incidentally, I should say that the Adaptation Committee has already reached out to us in terms of collaborating, but of course, as an Xcom, we do believe that we need to have that conversation internally first, but we are looking at those synergies with other bodies in terms of taking that work forward. So members, I would like to now open the floor to you again. If I may ask the Secretariat to put the slide up again so they could see the second part of it, which is how to liaise with other constituted bodies if deemed necessary, on what reports the other bodies are planning to produce in response to the mandate to promote that collaboration and that synergy. The floor is open to members. I see Leanne.
Thank you again, Madam Co-Chair. Some very quick reflections on this. One option that I'm putting on the table is that as an Xcom, we should look at a table of content of sorts. What would we want to be putting forward to prepare for the global stocktake? And I think this would give us an idea of the areas that we will be focusing on. I think once we have that clarity, we are better able to say how in different parts of the report that we would put forward, we could collaborate with the other constituted bodies. I wanted to perhaps just make that quick intervention. Thanks.
Thanks, Leanne. If I may say, I'm quite useful in guiding the way we work going forward in terms of the collaboration. So definitely something to consider for the champions group that will be taking that work and discussion forward. Thank you. Additional inputs from members? Okay, so we have no additional inputs from members in terms of the collaboration at this point. So what I would do now is to open the floor to our observers. You may react to a comment that you've heard, of course, in terms of the current agenda item, and you may also make an additional input if you so wish. I see Hajit. Go ahead, Hajit.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for the opportunity to contribute to this very important agenda item. So I'm Harjeet Singh from Action International, and I'm speaking on behalf of Climate Action Network. A couple of things to highlight, as Secretary has very helpfully put together all the decisions related to global stocktake. from the civil society side, I would like to say that the GST process needs to be comprehensive as agreed, particularly in para 6 of the decision, which talks about all different elements and which also specifically refers to loss and damage. And we see loss and damage as part of the continuum, and we request and urge the Xcom to also look at it that way when we respond to the challenges that people are facing on ground. So we all know that enhanced action on mitigation will reduce pressure on adaptation, and more action on adaptation will also help address and reduce work on loss and damage. And I think, and as we look at global stocktake, we need to look at the entire continuum. And global stocktake should not be seen merely as a technical exercise. Our ultimate aim is to keep people and the planet safe. And Xcom has a very important role to play here. It must act as a bridge between countries and relevant bodies to provide inputs to the GST process related to loss and damage. And it's really important for the Xcom to collaborate with constituted bodies that reflect different kind of division of labor, when it comes to adaptation committee and also other bodies which can help connect the dots. And we must also recognize that developing countries need support. Not all developing countries are at a level where they can gather information related to loss and damage and analyze it and provide information and input to the GST process, which means they would need some support, and that's where Xcom can play a very important role by offering expertise, making it available to countries, developing formats and templates which can help countries collect and synthesize information, and which needs to be not only looking at what impacts they have faced, but also more forward looking. So Xcom indeed has a very important role to play to make sure that the right information in the right format goes to the GST process, and we play the role of the bridge. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for those points, Harjeet. And I'm noting your points in terms of being comprehensive, acting as a bridge, developing countries requiring technical and assistance, etc. So we're taking note of the points for the consideration of the Xcom members as they consider continue the deliberations. The floor is still open to observers. Remember to keep your intervention succinct to no more than 3 minutes. Floor is open. I see Daniel. Go ahead, Daniel.
Thank you very much, Don, and thank you to all the members of the Xcom and the participants. I wanted to jump in briefly to follow on Harjeet's interventions and highlight the role that the UN system can also provide in supporting the work of the Xcom to gather this information in terms of the synthesis. I work for ESQA, the Economic Commission for Western Asia. We're currently working with the needs-based finance assessment under the Standing Committee of Finance. This is a process that has seen a synthesis of the official submissions by the member states. But one thing that I wanted to highlight is that in the presentations of results from some of the regions, what has been highlighted is the need to expand beyond just the official submissions and look at other sources. And this is a process that takes some time to develop. We are here, we're standing by to support, and we're happy to assist in this process going forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for pledging that support and asking that we look beyond the normal sources as well. And we again will look out for those sources of collaboration and ability to help us with the work. Thank you for that. We can perhaps take one more intervention. I have Samuel. Go ahead, Samuel.
Okay, so can you hear me?
Yes, very clearly.
Good afternoon, morning, and good evening, wherever we are. And what I want to talk about is based on other constituent bodies in terms of collaboration. For me, I would say we also try to make sure we look into grassroots organizations that also trying to foster the affairs of loss and damages, because it has to do more with grassroots than the universal bodies at which we all come from. I'm representing Lungo, So, and then I'm a member of the Global Youth Climate Action Initiative. However, we focus more on grassroots issues that has to do with development and damages and all that. So I will ask or recommend if we go more into grassroots collaboration rather than the big bodies at which we are looking at. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid that as you proceeded, there was some background noise that prevented me from hearing all of what you've said. But what I would encourage you to do is to make that submission to us via the email address provided for that purpose, to ensure that we are not missing out on the input that you have made. At this point, I want to thank the Xcom members as well as the observers for the interventions that have been made so far. I want to ask whether there are any reactions from Xcom members on some of the interventions that they heard. Otherwise, what I will do is I will wait a few moments if anybody wants to come in from the Xcom at this point. Otherwise, I will move on. Okay, I don't see any hands. So what so far, what we heard of a few things. I am not attempting to summarize every single thing that was said during the meeting. I'm sure the Secretariat is capturing all of this. But we heard information or inputs in terms of the multiple sources of information for the synthesis reports, some suggestions for a broad range of sources. References were made to NDCs and NAPs. The 5-year rolling work plan was mentioned as a key source of information or focus for the synthesis report, looking for guidance from specific topics listed in Article 8 of the Paris Agreement was suggested as well. We heard a note of caution in terms of not straying too far into the conversation into how the Xcom will engage in the technical phase. In terms of, and those are from Xcom members. We also heard from Xcom members in terms of the constituted bodies working with the leg in respect of the NAPs that was mentioned, and in terms and a practical suggestion that the Xcom work on developing table of contents in advance of the work with the other constituted bodies was also raised. I am not attempting, as I said, to say everything that was said. I just want to incidentally clarify, Samuel, could you indicate what group you were, what organization that you were speaking on behalf of? And please, thank you.
Okay, Yungo.
Okay, just to be sure. Thank you so much. Got that. And Leanne, I see that your hand is up. Please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. I just wanted to check on whether we will be discussing the indicative time frame at this point. We are likely to be doing some work intersessionally, but in terms of how we structure the work that we're going to be doing, and if, for example, the Xcom accepts the proposal for us to do the table of content, to be able to better engage with other constituted bodies, what sort of timelines would we need to be doing those things so that we can advance in a seamless manner? Thanks much.
Thanks. Again, the floor was open for inputs on all of those matters, so you are free to make inputs on that, noting that the deliberations will continue further. You'd recall that it was you could have intervened, and you could still intervene as much on the information to be communicated, the indicative time frame and the milestones. So we've been getting a mix of inputs, so feel free to intervene in this regard. I see Antonio.
Thanks, Madam Co-Chair, and good morning and good afternoon and good evening to everybody, wherever you are. I just wanted to endorse the last intervention made by Leanne. we just also heard the last observer organization from UN. He was warning us that gathering information takes a lot of time. And Harjit was also mentioning that many countries are probably in need of support to provide the required information to feed the global stocktake. So it is very important for us to be ready to help those countries to gather the required information to make sure that the global stocktakes take place in the proper manner, and the outcome of the global stocktake really takes into account the issue of loss and damage with the required appropriate information. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Antonio, in terms of the noting the assistance that will be required to do the work on that needs to be undertaken, etc. I also see that, Leanne, do you still have your hand up, or that was from before?
No, I do. I wasn't seeing anyone taking the floor. So going back then to indicative time frame, I would suggest that by the next Xcom meeting, we at least have a decision relating to the areas that would be the focus of a synthesis report that we would want to prepare, and be able to thereafter communicate that to the other constituted bodies, so that as we proceed throughout the rest of 2021 and 2022, we are, and it can be a dynamic process, but at least we will then have a better idea of how the different bodies are conducting their work and how ours would align, complement theirs. So I'm putting that concrete proposal on the table, and perhaps also intersessionally having a small group help with fine-tuning some of these areas that the larger Xcom can deliberate at its next meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Leanne, for making the suggestion on the time frame to be able to look at something by the next meeting in terms of a timeline. Of course, we aren't making necessarily the decisions right now in terms of all of the timelines or all of the inputs or sources. We do expect to have that discussion continue intersessionally among the members. But we do have not a lot of time, but if anyone from the Xcom members want to react to Leanne's proposal, please do. Okay, so I see that we don't have any hands raised. So we are noting all the proposals that have been made in this regard. They have ranged from some on the scope in terms of information communicated. We got a bit on time frame, a little bit on milestones, not as much, but also in terms a little bit as well on the how to liaise with constituted bodies. So I think I summarized a number of the points made by Xcom members, and as well as some of those made by the observers as well. So we're taking note of all the inputs. With about 10 minutes left into this agenda item, may I ask that we form a champions group to take the work forward intersessionally. So volunteers for a champions group, the floor is open, and I expect to see many hands going up because of the great enthusiasm to deal with this matter. So looking for hands from Xcom members, please, for the champions group. I see Antonio. Kaisa. So Farhan. So we have 3 Xcom members. We do like to be able to have a balanced approach in how we deal with the matters. So unless I'm missing out in terms of the hands that have gone up, we have 2 A1s and 1 NE1. So we need another NE1 Xcom member, and I see Leanne. So now we have 4 Xcom members to deal with this matter going forward. We have taken note of those initial preliminary inputs that have been made by Xcom members as well as by observers. I take it, Antonio, you want to intervene?
Sorry, just putting down my hand. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Just wanted to ensure that it was a case where you wanted to intervene further. So we do have our small champions group with Fahan and Kaisa, Antonio and Leanne, who will be taking the GST matter forward. We'll be considering those initial inputs made here at the Xcom live session, but we'll also be considering the inputs made by observers as we proceed. Again, observers, because the time is up, we do need to end now, but again, we encourage you, if you have further inputs that you want to make in writing to the Xcom for consideration by the champions group, please, by all means, send in your email with your input specific to the item, bearing in mind the actual decision, our actual scope and mandate, and what we're required to do. Again, calling on members as we continue to work on this item to be able to think of the complementarity, to avoid issues of duplication, to be able to work within what is our mandate and capacity, but at the same time, importantly, to be able to come up with something that is useful in terms of, at the end, assisting in this process of averting, minimizing, and addressing loss and damage. So now it is, in St. Lucia, it is 6:55 a.m. So at this point in time, I'm just going to take a very short break before we go into the next agenda item. So just bear with us for a few minutes as I liaise with my co-chair. Thank you so much for your patience. We did indicate that there would be a short break for us to resume. I keep saying my time, which is 7, but for others, it's a different time, right? Okay, so at this point in time, I would like to turn over to my co-chair, Malcolm, who will take us through the next agenda item, which is agenda item 6 on the report of the Xcom. So over to you, Malcolm. Thank you, everyone.
Well, good morning, good evening, good afternoon to everybody. We jump now to midday in the UK. So some people have lost hours, some people have gained them. And so I turn to item 6 on the agenda now, which is the report of the Xcom. As everybody knows, we report annually to the conference, to the COP. The fact that there isn't going to be a COP this year means that COP26 will need to consider a 2020 and 2021 report together at COP26. And one of the things that we might need to do is to consider how that is best managed. Members did get the outline, suggested outline of that report, which will be from the period from November 2019 to October 2020. And if any members have comments on that outline, please let the Secretariat know by the end of the week. I don't propose to open the outline and discuss it in this format. I think that might get complicated and rather long-winded. So hopefully that outline, which is fairly uncontroversial, will be suitable in terms of reporting factual matters of what we've done. But what we would like to do now is to think a little bit about what any recommendations we might want to make arising out of the work that has been going on this year. Bearing in mind that those recommendations would need to be combined with recommendations for the following year. And I think, therefore, there would be an option to think about how recommendations are presented, whether there are 2 separate reports and 2 separate sets of recommendations, or whether we capture what happened this year and capture what happens last year and consolidate the recommendations all together to help COP26 have an easier ride in thinking through what the recommendations might be from the Xcom. You can do it either way, I guess. So what we could do here is we can think about gathering ideas and recommendations from members, which then the co-chairs can pull together and present to you on Thursday. We can present it to you later. If you give us the text on Thursday afternoon, we should be able to finalize and put forward draft recommendations on Friday. Or there may be the option of having a consolidated set of recommendations put together through the year for COP26, so there's only one group. So the floor is open, firstly, on whether you want to put together some recommendations now that would go in a 2020 report, or whether you want to put recommendations as one group, which we can gather some ideas for recommendations now, but bearing in mind that we may then want to revisit those before we go to COP26 in the light of work that we've done in the following year. Or whether you want a hermetically sealed report that would be the 19 to 2020 report, complete with recommendations, and we start afresh and fresh sets of recommendations, and therefore 2 separate reports go forward to COP 2020. So I invite interventions on that point first, whether we should have 2 separate reports, or we just gather our initial ideas and we have a factual report, but 1 set of consolidated recommendations through to COP 26. I've stunned you all to silence. Farhan, please. Farhan, if you're talking, you're on mute.
I absolutely was talking to myself, actually, or my 3-month-old. No, thanks for starting this conversation. I think from my perspective, I think just given the mode of work that we're in here with 2-hour sessions in a limited amount of time to really deal with the pressing issues that we have to resolve at this meeting, so we can continue working intercessionally on a variety of issues. I would take the perspective or approach the report that we've taken in the past when we've had deadlines on having to prepare the report ahead of a meeting, and having a sort of a factual summary of the work so far presented, and then we prepare a second annex that has the outcomes from the second meeting. I think we take a similar approach here. Obviously, it's slightly different, but I would say that from my perspective, I think having a report from 2020 that's focused primarily on the work that was undertaken, the description of the circumstances under which we've had to take that work, and how we've still carried forward our mandates would be a helpful first first volume of this report, and then hopefully by next year, when we are able to meet in person by the end of the year at the latest, but hopefully sooner than that, of course. We can actually have this discussion about recommendations that draws upon all of the work, and so we will at that point can review both the 2020 report as well as the ongoing additional work that would have happened in 2021, and to draw upon for our recommendations to the parties. So that would be my suggested approach. Thanks.
Thank you, Farhan. Katja, please.
Yes, I think we also that it is better to have one set of recommendations in 2021, so that we can use them before the COP26. And I think this is an approach decided by the Adaptation Committee as well, that they are collecting all their recommendations in 2021, and I think we could follow their example.
Okay, thank you. Hi, Adele, we can hear you.
Yeah, I have a problem. Yeah, anyway, yeah. I'm hearing, please.
Good, excellent, thank you. So at the moment, we have 2 votes for a consolidated set of recommendations towards the end of, that will come for the 2026 that we can discuss next year. But at the moment, we should still prepare a factual report of what's gone on for this year that will help to remind us and help us in putting together with the report, factually what's gone on next year, putting together a consolidated set of recommendations. Is there any objection to that way of thinking? Dawn, you have your hand up.
Thank you, co-chair. Of course, I'm not speaking as co-chair. I'm speaking in my personal capacity. I do think, in my personal capacity as Xcom member, that is, I do think it is critical to have a set of recommendations for this year. I recognize that COP26 is all the way in November next year. And I see the value in having the report for this year and the report for next year. But I think based on the discussions we've had so far, and I think there are key points that we could already raise as recommendations in a report of this year that will remain factual and that will be useful for stirring the discussion all of next year, for guiding the discussion and for alerting people as to what we've been doing and what we're thinking. I believe that recommendations are not necessarily cast in stone. At the end, the ultimate word remains that of the parties to decide what becomes decisions and what does not. So I would urge that we do consider recommendations with this year's report, and it remains to be seen what those recommendations will be as Xcom members deliberate. We will, there may be recommendations that are critical to make. I could think of quite a number right now. So I'm just putting that on the table. Thank you very much.
Can I just clarify with you, Dawn, that because what I was going to go on to do would be to say, yes, of course, there may be some ideas and recommendations that we should gather now and keep in our back pocket. So when we come to thinking about recommendations for COP26 as in a consolidated bunch, that we don't lose inputs from this year. Are you saying that what we should have is a set of recommendations, because you did say that they're not set in stone, a set of recommendations that would go with the 2020 report, which we would finish and put to bed and not come back to, or whether we should gather some ideas for recommendations now that we will keep and we will use them as input to a final set of recommendations, which will be a consolidated set for the two reports.
Okay, so the way I see it is, apart from the fact that the recommendations are critical, I think that a set of recommendations this year, yes, can be picked up next year as needed. By saying that they're not cast in stone, it's because I don't have the recommendations before me at the moment. When the recommendations come out or are made by members, we will be in a better position to determine what we do with them, whether they are to be considered again next year, and then we will put the appropriate clause in place to allow us to do that, whether they are already factual enough that they won't change, like for example the fact that something to do with the fact that we endorsed our terms of reference for the expert groups. There are things that are already factual and will not change. So I'm open to considering them again, picking them up next year. But I'm cautious to make a decision on recommendations that we have not yet seen. So it would be really useful to get those recommendations in, as we normally do among ourselves, to work electronically on a document as Xcom members and see how that emerges. And then we'll be in a better position to know what we have in front of us. I think it's premature to already make a decision even before we see the recommendations emerging from this session.
Thank you. So I understand you wish to collect recommendations now, and you may want to seek to have a decision of the Xcom that those are a decision may be made now, that those are kept forward to go forward to the COP. I mean, although I'd say the fact that we have endorsed the terms of reference for working groups is not so much a recommendation to the COP as a decision by the Xcom, and I think there's a slight difference between those two things. Anyway, are there any other ideas that we have? Because at the moment we have a slightly different way of seeing here at the moment, and as I understand it from Dawn, she would like to see what the recommendations that we gather are, and then to see what we come up with before those final decisions are made. But Dawn, your hand is up again, please. And then
I'm just
by
clarifying that if as a expert, the expert groups have already been formed. So just to clarify that point, the recommendation is basically welcoming the TOR. So that's why I think there's a lot of language that we have used in previous reports, and welcoming. There's work that has been done by the task force for displacement. There's work that has been done by the technical expert group on comprehensive risk management. Yes, a lot of this is in the body of the report, but having a set of recommendations that either they are an encouragement that need to be made in terms of collaborations and contact points, potentially the Santiago network. There are areas of encouraging, welcoming work that has been done, and many other things that can be suggested. I just want to clarify that point that you just made at the end in terms of what you thought I meant by the expert groups. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Leanne, please.
Co-chair, I would perhaps reflect a little on Dawn's point. I think there is some value in identifying what would have been provided had we been proceeding as usual. because reflecting on the report that we had submitted last year, I see where already we could start to put in some of the factual things that have been achieved. And in the next report, we can build on it instead of then trying to do everything from scratch. The mention of expert groups, for example, is one where, you know, parties may wish to welcome the launch of the expert groups. And in next year's report, we can build on that to say how the expert groups would have been able to achieve some of their activities, including perhaps the plan of action and some of the achievements that they would have made. Just using this as an example. But I think there is some value in looking at recommendations and helping us even to see what are some of those areas that we need to make sure we pay special attention to, even ahead of the next report that we'll be preparing. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Leanne. So it seems to me that it is not entirely clear whether we will have one set of recommendations, COP26 or not, but there are some things that we can think about now that might make useful recommendations from our current work, which we should not lose. And some of those are about welcoming the TORs. And I just wonder whether there are any other ideas that we can capture now from members as to what the recommendations you might want to put forward, and then therefore the co-chairs and the secretariat can capture those into some sort of elements paper that we can pull together for you. But if we could get some input as to what we might want to add into that paper, that would be very helpful. So the floor is open now for very short, chunky, concise ideas as to what we might want to have as recommendations that we would like to capture from our work this year. So I see Farhan and then I see Dawn.
Thank you, Malcolm, and I'll be brief here, just not to repeat what I said earlier. I think just given the time that we have at this meeting, I take Don's point very well that it is, there are oftentimes very much, I would love to call them boilerplate, but they're sort of standard recommendations that we do to sort of track our progress to the in implementing our mandates to note that we've, or to ask the parties to welcome certain activities. I think that might be something that's fine and something we could get agreement on as Xcom members within the time frame that we have this year or this meeting. But I think going beyond that will be, just to repeat what I said earlier a little bit, is just I think that will be a little bit difficult to do in this time, and I would endorse your idea of sort of capturing ideas that will require additional discussion and forward those on to the next year. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Dawn, please.
Thank you so much, Co-Chair. Again, just want to endorse what Farhan just said in terms of being able to work with some standard recommendations, and then maybe others. It remains to be seen. As I said, it would be premature to cut them off. In terms of making succinct recommendations now, as you requested, I do think it's useful for members to be able to deliberate on those recommendations, given the time that we have left for the other agenda items, that perhaps we could just a suggestion to members that perhaps we could do this electronically rather than now, but it's a suggestion as an Xcom member. Thanks.
Yes, indeed. Some of this will have, thank you. Some of this will have to be electronic. What I wanted to do now, as we have the time, is just to get out from people for them to state the kinds of recommendations, the kinds of things that they would like to put forward now, just to make sure that nobody is particularly surprised when an elements paper comes forward on the basis of electronic discussion, because if something turns out to be very controversial, then we might need to think about how we handle that, given we have very short time available. At the moment, what I hear is that what we can do now, given the time constraint, is to think about some quite factual recommendations that recognise and welcome endorsement of decisions that we have already taken. I'm assuming that, and people can raise their hands if they disagree, that is uncontroversial and that we should do that, and that our co-chairs and secretariat can work together on actually putting some of that together for your consideration on Friday. I don't know, is there anything else that people would like to capture now in recommendations, just to put it out there so people are not surprised? Don't feel you have to. I think it's fine otherwise, but your chance is now. So, Leanne.
Thanks, Co-Chair. Let me use my chance very wisely. Perhaps very quickly, two things that would be useful in the recommendation. One would be progress in implementing the mandates that have been given to us following the review of the WIM. And included in that, of course, would be the launch of the expert groups. And the other would be to welcome the progress that has been made by the expert groups already established. That would be the TFD and the Tech CRM. Thanks.
Thank you. And also to blow my trumpet, of course, the slow onset one, where we have our journal, which is coming through, and there's been lots of papers. It's been very well subscribed. Dawn, please.
Thanks. Just to bring up a few more. I was thinking that we would have had this intercession electronically, but I think with the whole COVID-19 challenges, acknowledging those extraordinary challenges faced by the Xcom this year, being able to welcome the progress that we made in terms of the 5-year rolling work plan, being able to, well, Leanne already mentioned the work done by the TFD and the Tech CRM, the work in terms of making progress in terms of the mandates that we were handed, the launching of the welcoming the launching of the expert groups that were on NELS and non-economic slow onset events, and ASEG, the action and support as well. Appreciation to organizations and experts that have assisted in us in going forward. Being able to even encourage organizations, bodies, networks, experts associated with the Santiago network to report on their progress to the executive committee, noting that we have our mandate is to receive those reports for inclusion. So encouraging those organizations, bodies, networks, and experts associated with the Santiago network to report on their progress to the executive committee, and maybe I think, oh yes, acknowledging the importance of drawing upon relevant information from all sources, including from biennial transparency reports submitted by the by parties as per our terms of reference endorsed by the Xcom. Thanks.
Thanks, Dawn. I missed your last point because I dropped out for a second, but I'm sure we can catch up on that later. Russell, please.
Thanks. Thanks, everybody. So yes, I just wanted to support what Leanne said about the work of the existing groups as well. I think it's probably, as Farhan had said, like a standard to thank or to sort of acknowledge the events that have been on loss and damage, and so I guess this will be a little bit in advance of the November discussion, but also the task force on displacement is looking at doing some events. So I think it's often worthwhile sort of acknowledging those. And in the past, we have also just recommended thanks to the expert groups and organisations who are on those task forces as well. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Leanne, if your hand up again.
Oh, yes, thanks. Just very quickly, I think the work that was done between the tech and the Xcom on the coastal zone, the name slips me, but I think that would be a useful report to mention in the recommendation, even as part of how the different constituted bodies are collaborating.
Okay, so thank you. So what I get from this is that we should pull together quite a lot of the thinking and standard recommendations to recognise the help that the work that has been done and the help that the Xcom has received. I'm sure that the Secretariat and the co-chairs can think through those and propose something for you on Thursday. May I suggest, if there's anything, I'll come to you in a moment, Russell, if there's anything more particular that we have not covered now, that you send an email in by Thursday morning to the Secretariat with your ideas as to what you may not have mentioned, but that you think needs to be included, so we make sure we capture it in a draft elements paper. But Russell, please.
Oh yeah, sorry, just forgot to add about encouraging countries to put forward focal points in response to the Secretariat's letter.
Okay, thank you. Fine, thank you. I think we've come to an end of this, and we've come to the end of it, according to my schedule, a bit early, which is nice. So if people have no objection, I would like to move on to the next agenda item, if I may, which is item 7A, a summary of the Xcom's 2020 evaluation. And there's a background document that you can see, and it is Xcom 2020/12/2, and it's on the Xcom 12 webpage. And if I can ask the Secretariat to put the slide on the process to date on the screen for us all, please. And so there's the background paper that's come up in the chat for everybody, should they wish to have it. And then, so I won't read the slide out because you can all read. And so there we are. So that's what we've done there. And so what we propose in terms of because the reflections have been made in the 5-year Warring Work Plan. And so what we propose is this, which is the next slide. And for this, so this would be the report, because I think there was some interesting work in the views of the successes and shortcomings and lessons learned, and I think that is a very useful guide to us to keep in mind when we move forward in putting together our activities. And I don't know if there is any objection or thoughts on whether we should do more or less with the evaluation that we have already discussed. And I would invite interventions on the floor as to whether that co-chair's proposal is acceptable on a reaction to the evaluation, the work that we've done on the evaluation, self-evaluation stuff. I will take silence as to indicate that everybody's absolutely fine with that, and we can move rapidly on to the next bit of the agenda. Fine. Therefore, I would say In terms of reaction to for agenda item 7A, the summary of the Xcom's 2020 evaluation, the co-chair's proposal in how we will reflect that is accepted, and it is so decided. And I'll bang something somewhere. There we are. There's a bang. Thank you. If we can move on now to item 7E, loss and damage contact points, and I'll just shuffle a few things on my screen now, just to find out where we are with all of this. So there is a document as well, of course, on the web that can be referred to, and I would direct your attention towards that. And there is a slide that we can show you on progress to date, and indeed here it comes up in the chat that Miwa has nicely done for us. And so that's what we've done so far. And as far as I know, there has been, shall we say, a varied response of parties to nominating loss and damage contact points. And we have, we would like to propose that there's another co-chair's proposal which we'll put up for you to read. Which will come up shortly. There's a bit of a lag. It's a bit difficult to do that. So there it is. So basically, to consider intersessionally, I mean, because we have very limited time here, about how we can help to engage and help people to discover, to encourage the formation of loss and damage contact points and how we work with them. And I would just like to open the floor now for reactions on how we might carry forward that intersessional work and how we might do more on the loss and damage contact points, and how best we might discover how we would work best with them. And so may I suggest that the slide comes down so we can see people when they talk a lot more easily. And I have Nidal and I have Leanne.
Thank you so much, Malcolm. Indeed, I'm not sure how to raise this issue. The issue is about the enhancing the capacities of the national focal points for the loss and damage. I think looking for the document before us here, it is not well considering this, or this is not well reflected. I need. My point is that looking for other constituency bodies and the national focal points, for example, I'm recalling the one on the gender national focal points, and because I'm the national focal point for the UNFCCC, I'm following that as well. There are a lot of activities aiming and considering enhancing the capacities of the national focal points for the gender, for example. So it's very much important for us here to consider having such kind of capacity building activities that enhance the capacities of the national focal points for the loss and damage in order to be able to catch up, because we know, well, this is just newly addressed, and we have still, so far we have a few parties who are nominating their national focal points for the loss. And so I think it is very much important to reach out to the parties aiming at enhancing capacities of the current nominated ones, in addition to looking for more active engagement for other parties who not yet do so in order to nominate focal points. And so I think some kind of awareness or communication in that regard with the parties is very important at this point of time. That will help much in the way forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Nidal. Leanne, please.
Thanks, Malcolm. I wanted to perhaps put forward a very concrete suggestion based on the fact that the loss and damage contact points and the Xcom, it's a two-way street, if I may. On one hand, we need to define the role of the Xcom with respect to the contact points. And on the other hand, we need to be able to say what are the expectations with respect to the contact points. And this could be done in, I don't know if it's a guide or a standard operating procedure or something that we could use to define what that is. On the role of the Xcom, it's about sharing information. So whether it's on reports that have been done or on upcoming meetings, if there are useful outputs from the expert groups, etc. Also, what are the modalities that will be used for sharing and the timelines, etc. On the other hand, it's also having clarity on what we expect the contact points role to be. You know, whether it's in sharing their experiences or providing reports to the Xcom that we can use in our work, and also providing any input or review on some of the products that we would be producing for their benefit. It may be useful to have a small group of the Xcom helping to firm up what some of these are, but I think in that way, if we're clear on what the roles are, we have a better way to move forward and to see how to engage with the contact points. So with that, I'll end my intervention. Thank you.
Thanks, Leanne. Farhan, please.
Thank you, Malcolm. And just to reflect back on what our discussions on this topic have been for the last year, I think we had a discussion at Xcom 10 about this. I remember sitting down with a few colleagues and writing down some ideas, and I see those ideas now pretty accurately and well reflected in the document that you prepared ahead of this meeting, co-chairs. So thank you for doing that. I support what's in these documents, and I think there's just one word of caution here that I think we need to keep in mind, especially because of the numbers of contact points that have been nominated so far, is that we can't tie ourselves so strictly to this contact points modality that's the only place where we're looking to get feedback, or the only place that we're focusing on providing our attention. So noting that a number of countries have not chosen to nominate a contact point, which is of course up to them. We should also be clear that we're working on on the basis of our overall work streams to target both countries that have contact points and ones that don't. So I think that what's here in the document, I think is a good start, and I think we can endorse that and move that forward. I'm sort of just want to throw up a note of caution again, also just from our experiences over the summer of working on terms of reference for the expert bodies, that once we start these sort of processes to try and define specific roles and actions, it ends up ballooning into a much more protracted discussion of text on a paper versus going ahead and focusing on our core work, which is the work in the work plan to move forward products that are actually useful for folks. So I want to make sure that we're using the contact points to facilitate that process of developing good, strong products and being responsive to concerns that are being raised out there, but not to tie ourselves into a process where we're now trying to start a year-long discussion that we're only talking about the roles of these contact points and not getting focused on the activities. Thanks. I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Farhan.
Hello.
So I have a hand from Leanne, and somebody else said hello.
This is Adam. It's very difficult for me to follow, but I'm here.
we haven't heard from you yet today, so with Leanne's permission, please go ahead, Leanne Adal.
Thank you very much, and sorry for having these difficulties, but in terms of discussing on national loss and damage contact point, I do agree with the points raised by Leanne with regard to the very specific, let's say, 2 hours for the focal points provided by the Xcom. So the reason why the party established this focal point is to facilitate communication between national level issues or the government at national level and the Xcom itself. So whatever the Xcom will be done, I think it should be going through the national level and also local level. So that was very key focus for establishing this national contact point. So to do this, I think Leanne just described that we need to provide the focal points with very specific tasks in the specific timeline. And Nedal was also raising very critical points with regard to capacity building to national contact points on loss and damage, at least to capacitize them to how to communicate their loss and damage needs to the Xcom, and then from Xcom side, how best the decision made by the Xcom to deliver to address the needs of national level loss and damage issue. So I think this is very critical issue for us to discuss about it. And in terms of providing some sort of information, I think this is a correct time for us to involve the national loss and damage contact point to be part of our discussion at Xcom meeting. This is critically important. So we can also recommend or at least provide our recommendation for the parties for this year report to include how best we can engage national contact point to deal with communication between national level loss and damage issue and the Xcom itself, especially to involve the contact point of the loss and damage to participate our Xcom meetings. I think this is one of the capacity building to raise the awareness of the national contact points. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Adal. I see your hand, Leanne, but just before I come to you, just a point of clarification for me, Adal. You mentioned that the Xcom should provide terms of reference for the focal points, who are sort of nationally determined. Is it your view then that the Xcom can or should sort of tell focal points what they should or should not be doing? I'm just a little bit confused about that.
Oh, thank you very much, Malcolm. Yes, it's a like terms of reference, but at least we need to provide them. The Xcom needs to provide the contact points with some guidance. So it's not really terms of reference, but guiding issue for the contact point to follow. But if we go for terms of reference, and then we need to describe what needs to be done by the contact point. And in terms of these terms of reference, we can just provide them to at least to work with us with regard to 5-year rolling work plans, and then also the other point will be how to inform the Xcom with regard to national needs on loss and damage. Those are two issues that we need to discuss about. So 2 ways. but I could say guiding issues rather than terms of reference. Thank you.
Thank you. Leanne, please.
Thank you once again. I wanted to reflect on what Farhan said. I do recognize that at this moment we don't have as many contact points as we would like. However, without doing a survey to really understand why that is, I think that exploring opportunities for increasing the number of countries that are putting forward contact points is something that we should look at. I do think that clarifying the roles of the contact points and how the Xcom would be relating to them may be one way of facilitating that. I wouldn't necessarily call it a terms of reference, but perhaps a guide of sorts, so that the Xcom as well as the contact points are clear on the relationship that we're looking to build and to establish, how we will be sharing information one way and the other. And hopefully, once this is clear, the national focal points will have an opportunity to better identify who would be most suitable to serve as contact points. And I believe it was said earlier that even in terms of some of the recommendations that we may be looking at is to encourage parties to really put forward and nominate those contact points so that we can expand on that and we have a greater network of persons to work with. And finally, the guide can also be used to engage with focal points where there are no contact points, or even in addition to. So it's really just for us to clarify how we intend to have that relationship ongoing. Thanks much.
Thank you. I would just wonder whether there, I mean, if you look at the document that came through towards the bottom of it, there are some clear ideas about what, how Xcom might work with loss and damage contact points, and whether people feel that's a sufficient sort of broad guide, bearing in mind what others have said, that we don't have so many contact points, so we need to go broadly, just to bring your attention back to that document. But can I now turn to Yelena, please, and then Dawn.
So, hi everybody, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I just was going to mention the document, which is quite useful in outlining what the loss and damage focal points should be doing. So that could be a sort of a guide and a tool for us to kind of promote these roles. And I just wanted to say, I think we should focus on growing the number of loss and damage focal points, although I understand countries have already been encouraged to nominate them, but the fact is there's about 40 that are nominated now. So I think we should focus on this and use this guide to move on sort of our contacts with them. Thank you.
Thank you. Dawn, please.
Very briefly, I'm just going to support what Yelena just referenced. So there's no need for me to elaborate in terms of the document. I think maybe members may have missed the detail in there that at Xcom 10, the request was made for us to be able to do this, and that guidance was provided right there in the document. So if you just have a look, that might help and see if that covers the need or what you are requesting. Thanks.
Leanne, did you want to come back?
Oh, yes, thanks. So the guide that was provided, I think, is very useful. So perhaps just to clarify, I wasn't suggesting that it not be used, but I think the information in it could form the basis on which we develop a specific guide for our relationship with the loss and damage contact points. So just thought I would clarify. Thanks.
Okay, Antonio, I'll take your input, and then I will try and summarize, and then I'll ask for some inputs from the observers, and then I will try to propose a way forward when we finish that. So, Antonio, please.
Yeah, thank you, Malcolm. Very quickly, we need to take into account this document that we produced at the Xcom 10, but it is also important to really help the contact points to understand that we are trying to help them and that we are not just putting more work on them, that their needs will be attended to. It is not for them to do or to help our work, but it is for us to help their work, because they really are the ones who know what are the needs on the local level, at the national level. So just a word of caution to develop wording that helps clarify that we are here to help them, to help their needs, and not just to ask them to help us what are the developing of our work. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. So colleagues, what I have so far is that we all agree that we should do a bit more to encourage more loss and damage focal points to come forward and countries to nominate them, but recognize that that is a matter for countries, and that in fact the Xcom has a wider set of people it needs to communicate to, and shouldn't completely devote itself to the contact points. Contact points may indeed need some of their capacity enhanced and some better idea of what the Xcom can offer them. There is some of that in the document that we discussed at Xcom 10, and there is a difference of opinion as to whether in fact those guidelines need to be elaborated further in terms of a guide of what Xcom can offer to those focal points, and indeed some sort of guidance on what the focal points may need to know to help what they are doing. That is what I got so far, and the idea is that if these lines were to be elaborated in any way, that would have to be done through some small group intersessionally. What I would like to do now, because I saw in the chat somebody, a thing that came through as a newly appointed national focal point, I would like to invite some, Nadal, I see your hand, and seeing as an Xcom member, if you have a very short intervention, I'll take that now. But then I would like to especially hear from any national focal points that we have observing this meeting, and if they'd like to speak. But Nadal first, please.
So thank you so much, and I'm reflecting for something on the chat box from one of the loss and damage national focal points, was Erling, who was a former Xcom member, and he is indicating the issue which is still missing, the formal communication channel between the national focal points for the loss and damage the Xcom. So what sort of communication channel that to be in that regard? Only just, and if Erling is still there, he may jump in that. Thank you so much.
You anticipate me. Erling, I'm going to jump onto you, and indeed any other possible any other focal points that may be listening, as to what you would find useful from the Xcom. So Erling, the floor is yours. Erling's not known for being shy, so maybe he has a technical issue.
He needs to unmute himself.
Yeah, if you're talking, Erling, you're muted. Okay, we can't hear Erling, so we'll move on. And I have I had a hand from he has a technical problem, right? I see hands from Harjeet and from Laura, and Harjeet's hand did go up first. But seeing as Laura hasn't spoken so far, if I can perhaps give the floor to Laura.
Thanks, Malcolm. My point is an observer intervention on the agenda item report of the Xcom. So I'll let Haji go first, as he'll do one on the discussion now and go after him.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear that. Your observation is on what? Sorry.
So my points are on the agenda item Xcom report, but Haji will do one on this point. So I let him go first and do my intervention after him.
I'm still lost.
Yeah,
I still didn't hear that. I'm sorry.
I think what she said is that her intervention was on the Xcom report, and since Harjeet is likely to be speaking to this agenda item, she will allow him to go first, and then she will go after.
Yeah, thank you. On the Xcom report, Laura, if I can ask you to do things in writing, and rather than make an intervention here, because we've moved on from that one. I'd like to finish this item, if I may. And if there's time, I'll come back to you. But please, Harjeet, go ahead.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Malcolm. Very quickly. On this, I think it's very important to identify the right person. I think getting the right focal person is absolutely vital to connect the work that's happening in national level and what we are discussing here. Let's also recognize, and I'm going to state the obvious, just to underline that there are very different structures in countries. In some countries, there are disaster management or risk reduction people who have the potential to become the focal persons, whereas in some case there are climate change focal points. In some countries, they're very well connected. Particularly, I know in island countries, they're well integrated, whereas in most countries, the issue of loss and damage is not well understood and various departments are not well integrated. So I totally underline and agree with the idea that Lian mentioned, that we need to have clarity on role, and we should have, and Nidal also mentioned earlier, we need to have some kind of guidelines that should be provided. Of course, we don't expect the focal point to be an expert on all issues. For us as civil society, we do see that person playing a very important role in connecting with various departments and bodies nationally and locally, while also contributing to the global efforts that are being made at the Xcom level. And this is what Erling was also saying, it's a two-way traffic. How do we make sure that there's a connection, and that national focal person helps also connect with various departments in countries, because this is a massive issue and we can't just rely on one person to be an expert. Thank you.
Oh, hello.
Yeah, thanks. Did you hear what I said?
Sorry, I heard some of it, Harjeet, to be honest. I came in and out again there.
Okay,
I'm sure that the Secretariat captured it though.
Okay.
I'm not the most important person in the room. It's fine. Thank you. Okay, are there any more interventions on this point? Because I do wish to be inclusive, and now so I could come back to Laura on the report, which it seems that they knew that some observers would like to make a. Oh, sorry, I've seen Farhan's hand and up and Dawn's hand. My system's going very weird. But now Farhan has disappeared and I only have Dawn. So Dawn, I'm not sure how this is working at all. Farhan, you were above Dawn, so do you wish to speak?
If I could, very briefly. Sorry, I think I may have unmuted myself and reset my hand. Just to say quickly, I think the focus going forward here should be in our implementation of the work under in our work plan and in the plans of action of the expert groups as well, to make sure that we are utilizing the contact point modality or contact points and the discussions, in line with the guidance that's in this document, to the extent possible, and to make use of that through our work. And again, I'll just say I don't think necessarily developing further elaborated guidelines or specific sort of work is as effective in engaging the people at the national level than to actually approach them with specific work projects and work streams to have them provide feedback on a particular work product. I think would be a far better.
Thank you.
Use. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Dawn, very rapidly. I notice we have 2 minutes left, and
okay, very rapidly. Just to remind members, again, other than the guide from this note from this meeting, that in 2019, our last recommendation in the list, I believe, said, note the decision of the Executive Committee to continue exploring opportunities and modalities for engaging stakeholders at the regional and national level, including national focal points and loss and damage contact points. I'm raising it because it was the last recommendation in our 2019 report. And just a brief thing, if I may, co-chair, is that also having had a discussion on this previously as Xcom members in terms of the engagement, one of the things several members of the Xcom were cautious about, or there was caution about, not becoming prescriptive in such guidelines. So this is why the co-chairs put forward this very broad type of document, because a number of members had concerns about becoming prescriptive, because at the national level, national focal points can decide what is allowed by their loss and damage contact points. So just a reminder as we take this forward. Thanks.
Thank you. Can I just then propose a way forward, and then I will give you the floor, Laura, very briefly to the end, as long as you have a brief intervention. I think what we've agreed on, and I hear no dissension from the idea that we need to assist the focal points and provide to them help and information. And some of the ways about doing that have already been elaborated, and that the Xcom needs to be seen as a service. With that in mind, I think one of the important things is for us to continue to reach out in order to learn what people may want from the Xcom. And therefore, given that there are significant misgivings across parts of the Xcom about developing a new set of guidelines or standard operating procedures or anything like that, especially given the fact that they're not hear me? Yeah, Samuel Okori, can you mute, please? Thank you so much. Where was I? So I think that given that there isn't consensus about developing a new guide, and that can be time consuming, given that we need to, I think I have heard the point that we need to listen to focal points, and given that they will have a very wide range of connections and roles in countries, as Harjit pointed out, that at the moment that the Xcom should and listening to them over the next months to understand how best we can serve them, bearing in mind some of the decisions and discussions that we had previously. Is that an acceptable way forward for everybody? It does not close the door to further guidance should that become necessary or obvious that it's needed at a later date, but doesn't embark upon it now. Leanne, please.
Yes, thanks, Co-Chair. I guess it's just checking what then is the recommendation for us to improve on the engagement with loss and damage contact points, or even having new contact points nominated, given the concern that has been raised earlier. So if we're not going to be sharing some additional clarity, whether in a guide or some other form, what then is our approach to improving on that engagement and helping them to understand what it is that our relationship is expected to be? Thanks. I have a question.
Yeah, and I think that is not clear at the moment. That's where, in terms of the proposal, it's that intersessionally we should think about what the opportunities and modalities might be for the Xcom to engage with the focal points. And I think that will be part of all of the expert groups' work as we seek to engage others, and to a reminder for us to be outward looking and to think about how that might work. So I am not proposing a sort of a group to work on in terms of reference or outreach, but instead saying that actually this involving of focal points and how we engage with those needs to be a feature of the work of all of our intersessional work going forward.
Hello.
Yes, Adele.
This is Adam speaking. Thank you very much, Malcolm. I'm now really confused, because if we don't have some sort of guidelines or guiding issue for the national contact point, and then we still have same condition like one that we are facing at the moment. So my point will be having some sort of discussion about this, whether colleagues from the Xcom members can come up with some sort of generic views of how to communicate with them and how to help them, and then it will be useful. So guiding issue will be critically important. How to guide them.
Okay,
how to provide
Adele,
them information.
Yeah, Adele, I think that what my point was that I don't disagree with you, that we need to know how we do that. But the first way about how we might guide those, and the first step in that, I would suggest, is to listen to the focal points and list what they might need. So therefore, in terms of intersessionally, that is why we say we consider in our work how we might engage with national focal points. Emerging from that, there may be a future need for guidance and assistance. Harjeet's point was a point that there is that where the national focal points sit and the countries are all very different, so there will no be one size fits all. And so that I think your point is well taken, but I think that there is a view at the moment that is a little premature to think of some overarching guidance, but we need to work on that and continue to reach out and discover what focal points might need and seek to fill that need.
Okay, thank you very much. But this was just to facilitate how to address, the service delivery that we are doing at Xcom level, and then how to help the countries. But anyway, thank you very much for this.
Okay, thank you. Laura, can I give you the floor very briefly on the report? This is with the permission of the Xcom members for going back a little bit in our agenda.
Thanks, Malcolm. Thanks for the possibility to come back to the item. I'll do this statement on behalf of the Climate Action Network, and I'll be brief. So we couldn't find the outline for the report you mentioned, so we don't know what the report 2020 looks like. Our points are based on observation from last year's Xcom report, and we have 3 brief points. First one, from our perspective, it's very important to have a balanced report that covers both activities that have been conducted, but also gaps and challenges for the work of the Xcom. And during the last report session, the idea of a standardized template for the Xcom report came up, and we think that preparing such a template would be a good idea, and it could include elements like status quo of the Xcom in implementing its mandate, particularly looking at the status quo in implementation of activities. And this should look both at things that could be accomplished, but also at gaps. What activities could not be accomplished so far, and for what reasons? What are topics that have been under prioritized so far, for what reasons? The report should also look at what are challenges for the Xcom, what are obstacles in implementing the work plan, and what are things that the Xcom cannot do to its mandate. And if that report would allow to identify the gaps and then address them in the next working period. The second point is that we think, also based on your discussion, that a set of recommendations for the 2020 report should be developed to guide next year's work, and this would also allow for addressing gaps in 2021. And last point, one thing that we would like to highlight for the analysis of the status quo and the recommendation is that one reason the Xcom exists is also to bring change at the ground level. And from our perspective, this is not very much being done yet, and it needs to be reflected in the report and allow for the identification of activities that contribute to bringing this change, for example, through supporting the operationalization of the Santiago network. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Laura. Tomorrow, I would just like to close the session now. And I think that I would remind people that the next meeting is at 12 Central CEST Central European Summer Time tomorrow. And the items that will be taken up is item 7B, which is fostering public education and awareness raising efforts, including capacity building, and item 7C, which is modalities for sharing relevant knowledge and experience among practitioners. And so I would like to encourage everybody to be ready and read up in order for that. And thank you so much today for all identifying yourself on the line so we knew who's talking. And thank you all very much for your constructive and succinct inputs, which are extremely important when we are meeting in this mode. So with that, I think we have come to the end of today's proceedings. So thank you very much all for your participation. And we look forward to hosting you all tomorrow for another day, another Zoom meeting, or Microsoft Teams in this case. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.